Today we're going to be discussing about solving quadratic equations by completing the square, incorporating imaginary roots. For our first example, we are going to have x squared minus 2x minus 3. And this example will give us a real root. So this will have real roots. So what's the first step? The first step is for you to make sure that the coefficient of x squared is a positive 1. Now that it's positive 1, we proceed to the next step. And the next step is for you to remove your c from this side and move it to the other side. And it would look like this. X squared minus 2x, leave a space, equals positive 3. Positive 3 because the negative 3 went to the other side. That's your second step. The third step is for you to identify your b. You will divide it by 2 and you will square it. So our b is negative 2. So that will be a negative 2. Divide that by 2 and square it. Negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. So this is positive 1. Our next step is to add this number to both sides. So we will add plus 1 and plus 1. The moment you do this process, you can now be assured that this is a perfect square. This is a complete square. So the next step is for you to put parentheses and square, indicating that that's a perfect square. The next step is for you to get the square root of x squared, which is x, get the square root of 1, which is a 1, and follow the sign of the middle term. So that's a minus. And this will be a 4. Our next step is to isolate your x. And for me to be able to isolate my x, I need to remove my squared. You have learned long time ago that for you to remove that squared, you have to put this whole expression under the radical sign. Whatever you do on the left, you do on the right. And so now this will be gone. And that would now just be x minus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 4. And that will become x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2. You will have two possible answers. One is x equals 1 plus 2. And the other one is x equals 1 minus 2. This is a 3. And this is a negative 1. We got the 1 from this 1 right here. We move it to the other side. It turned to positive. And the positive 2 here is because of the plus 2. And the negative 2 here is because of the minus 2. And so your solutions are 3, negative 1. Okay, our example number 2. X squared minus 12x plus 11. Again, step 1 is to ensure that the coefficient of x squared is a positive 1, which it is. So we proceed to step 2. Step 2, we are moving our c to the other side. So this becomes x squared minus 12x, leave a space, equals negative 11. And our third step, identify your b, divide it by 2, and square it. Our b is negative 12. Divide that by 2, square it. This inside is a negative 6. Negative 6, close parentheses, squared is a positive 36. We are going to use this number to add to both sides. And this now is a perfect square. So we proceed to putting it in parentheses and squaring. And then this is positive 25. You get the square root of x squared, which is x. Get the square root of 36, which is a 6. Copy the sign of the middle term. And now we try to isolate our x by putting this expression under the radical sign. Whatever you do on the left, you do on the right. This now will be gone. This is x minus 6. This is equal to plus or minus 5 because square root of 25 is 5. We now have two possible answers. One is x equals positive 6 plus 5. And the other one is x equals positive 6 minus 5. So just a reminder, these two are interchangeable. I could have my positive 5 in the front of positive 6. And the same way with this, I can have my negative 5 in the front of positive 6. Now this is 11 and this is a 1. Therefore, my solutions are 11, 1. Turn your notebook to the next page for example number 3. 2x squared equals negative 6 plus 8x. We need to move the positive 8x to the other side together with the a because that's the b and this is the c. So it would now look like this. Leave a space. And from the very beginning, we said that the coefficient of x squared should be a positive 1. So we need to turn this to a positive 1 by dividing all terms by 2. And this will change to x squared minus 4x, still leave a space, equals negative 3. And then we proceed to the next step, which is identify your b, which is negative 4. So b over 2 and then square it. So in this case, it's negative 4 over 2, square it. This is negative 2 inside. Squared is negative 2 times negative 2, which is a positive 4. This is the number that we will use to add to both sides. Once you do that process, this now is a complete perfect square. So now the way to do this is you will put a parenthesis and a squared. What you will put inside is the square root of x squared, which is x, square root of 4, which is 2, and the sign of the middle term. And then you're going to solve for that one, which in this case is a positive 1. Now to remove the squared so we can solve for our x and isolate our x, we need to put this whole expression under the radical sign. Whatever you do on the left, you do on the right. So this will now be gone, and that will now be x minus 2 equals plus or minus 1, because this is plus or minus right here, and the square root of 1 is a 1. So now you have two possible answers. One is x equals, let me do this first. So positive 1 plus the 2. This is a plus 2 because this negative 2 went to the other side. And the other one is a negative 1 plus a 2. Why negative? Because that is plus or minus, and we are now doing the negative part. This one goes to the other side, and so that is a positive 2. So this is a 3, and this is a positive 1. Your solutions are 3, 1. Our next example is x squared plus 6x plus 13 equals 0. This is when I introduce to you the imaginary root. So I want you to watch and see how this is done. So again, our first step is to make sure that this coefficient is a positive 1, which it is. So we're going to copy it down. Copy down the b part, which is 6x, leave a space, and then put the positive 13, which is your c, to the other side, making it become negative 13. Next step, identify your b, which in this case is positive 6. So that's going to be b over 2, and then you're going to square it. This is a positive 6, which is 6 over 2. That's a 3. Square it. So 3 squared is a 9. This number will be used to add to both sides. So plus 9 plus 9. So equal sign. This right here is already a perfect square. So again, parentheses with the squared. And square root of x squared is x. Square root of 9 is a 3. Copy the sign of the middle term, which is a plus. And then solve for this, which is a negative 4. To isolate your x and remove the squared, we're going to put this under the radical sign. Whatever you do on that side, you do on the other side. This will now be gone, and this is going to be x plus 3 equals square root of negative 4. This now is going to give us an imaginary number. It is because there's no number that if you multiply by itself, including its sign, is going to give us a negative number. So for example, this is not a 2 because, or this is not a negative 2 also, because 2 times 2 is a positive 4 and negative 2 times negative 2 is still a positive 4. So this is like an impossible situation, but in math really it's not, because we have such a thing as imaginary numbers. So what are imaginary numbers? They say, so we say that the negative 1 under the radical sign, which is square root of negative 1, is called an I. An I is a representation for imaginary number. So that's an I. So how will I solve this is by doing this. I'm going to factor out the negative 1, and I will have a positive 4. In this case, I will be able to get the root of a positive 4, but keep my square root of negative 1 as my I. So this will be copied down. And now my answer is x plus 3 equals 2. Because of the positive 4 now, the square root of positive 4 is a 2. And then we said that this is your I. So now your two possible answers are x equals, oh, by the way, I'm so sorry, that's plus or minus. This is plus or minus. We're not changing anything. It's still the same thing. So those are plus and minus. So this is now going to be a negative 3 because the 3 went to the other side. And we're going to do the plus first. So that's plus 2i. And for this other one, we will have x equals negative 3 minus 2i. So example number 5 is x squared plus 2x plus 20. So that's a positive 1. So we can just copy that down. 2x equals negative 20. And we identify our b, divided by 2 and square it. So in this case, we have 2 over 2. Squared is a 1 times 1 is a positive 1. Add that to both sides. We're now going to have a perfect square, which parentheses squared. Square root of x is x, square root of 1 is 1, copy the sign of the middle term, and this is a negative 19. Put the radical here, that's plus or minus, this is now x plus 1, equals plus or minus square root of negative 19, which I can actually separate into plus or minus negative 1 times positive 19. That's x plus 1. We all know that square root of negative 1 is an I. So this is now plus or minus. I is in the front this time because of that. And this will stay inside because that's not perfect. So we have x plus 1. We now have two possible answers. One is x equals negative 1 plus I square root of 19, and the other one is x equals negative 1 minus I square root of 19.